Good day, everybody. Good morning to some parts of the world. Good afternoon, good evening in other parts. And a special good morning to those of you in Perth, Australia who have gotten up at, you must be crazy o'clock to take part in this webinar. But thank you for joining us in this IAP2 monthly webinar as we meet more of the Core Values Award winners from 2016. My name is Drew Snyder, pinch hitting for Amelia Shaw, who is usually your moderator on these ones, but she is otherwise engaged, so she has left you in my hands. Today we're going to meet the first ever recipients of the Core Values Award for Respect for Diversity, Inclusion, and Culture from IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. These are like, I mean, you talk about diverse. These are very diverse projects in themselves. So we're going to talk about that today as we meet the people who ran it. Before we get rolling, just like to run through a couple of things here. First of all, this is being recorded, so we will make sure that you get the link to the recording. It'll be posted on the YouTube accounts from IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA, usually within 24 hours. We'll also send you the PowerPoint presentations that our presenters use, and we'll also make sure that you get any other collateral material so you can find out more about these projects and also how you can take what they have done and apply it to the work that you are doing. Throughout this is a very interactive session, so we encourage you to take part. We'll have some poll questions throughout, so you can just click yes, no, whatever the different options are. You can also ask questions and make comments throughout. A couple of ways, just on your screen there, we just lost it, but there is a little hand icon that you can click on, and I'll be watching it. I can open up your microphone, excuse me, I can open up your microphone so that you can then ask your question directly, or type it into the question chat box, and at an appropriate time, I'll break in and ask the question. Also, Tom Parent and Ann Carroll from the St. Paul, Minnesota Public School System, they've got kind of a leading discussion question which they want to pose to you, so please be prepared to take part in that. That'll come at the end of their presentation. So once again, this is, as I say, it's going to be recorded. It is being recorded. We'll also make sure you get that link. And now it's time to get right into it. Two very different projects, but they all involve diversity and inclusion. And we're going to start off by hearing from the people behind the Canadian winner, which was called Tides of Change. It was developing an economic development plan for Cormorant Island, tiny island, and they'll tell you more about that, where it is and so forth. Colleen Hamilton is a planning associate with EcoPlan International. She is passionate about working with communities to improve their local economies. Her work with EcoPlan includes economic research, public participation, and occasionally fun stuff like designing heritage signs or planning a farmer's market. Her goal is to help in the transition from strategic planning to strategic doing. Colleen has worked with clients from all over BC, from little towns like Hartley Bay and Port Alice to the big shiny lights of Metro Vancouver and the Victoria region. And several of these projects have won national and provincial planning awards. She graduated from the University of Victoria. She earned a Master of Sciences in Economic Development from the London School of Economics. Right now she's enrolled in Simon Fraser University's Certificate in Economic Development, and she's getting all kinds of new and inspiring ideas for local economies. Colleen is joined by Justin Beadle, who is the Chief Administrative Officer for the Village of Alert Bay. And Justin has been described as an inventive strategist with a sixth sense that often causes people to say, "How did you know that?" Beyond local government, Justin's background spans the information technology, asset management, securities, and construction industries. And to give you a mental picture of Alert Bay and its surroundings, Justin and his wife enjoy whale watching, canoeing, and sitting by the fire after a long day of exploring, and I dare say in Alert Bay that means they're pretty much in their backyard. So Colleen and Justin, welcome, and I'm going to hand the screen off to you and we'll get this show underway.
Great, thank you very much.
It's all yours.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for the introduction, Drew. We're so honored to have won this award, and we're really excited to be here today to talk to you about the project. So Drew mentioned a little bit, but for those of you that don't know, we're talking today about a project called Tides of Change, which is the name of the economic development strategy that was jointly created by the Village of Alert Bay and the Namgis First Nation. So this was one of the first joint economic development strategies in Canada between a municipality and a First Nation. There's two of us presenting here today. I'm from EcoPlan. I worked on Tides of Change. And after I completed the project, Justin started as Chief Administration Officer. So we have kind of a different perspective on the project. So I'm going to be talking about the process of creating it and specifically how we incorporated inclusive public participation. And then Justin's going to talk about the implementation side of the plan and how that inclusive public participation has kind of flowed through into the implementation. Justin, over to you.
Thanks, Colleen, and hello to everyone who is joining us today. To give you some of my background, my wife and I first visited Cormorant Island on vacation in 2013 and immediately fell in love with the place and the community. The entire drive home after that first visit 4 years ago was asking ourselves, how can a community like that survive? In 2015, Tides of Change was released, and I was ecstatic. So my permanent relocation to Cormorant Island was driven in part by Tides of Change, and I'm fortunate to have become involved at the implementation stage. After Colleen presents the planning process, I'll follow with what I've seen in implementation, and specifically, I'll be focusing on how public participation has contributed to successful implementation of Tides of Change initiatives and how diversity and inclusion has remained an essential component to economic development here on our island. Unfortunately, no members of Namgis First Nation were able to join us today, but Chief Deborah Hanous says that we're planning a new economic path that combines established opportunities and new ones built on shared values. A sustainable economy requires collaboration, and our history and relationship with the Village of Alert Bay provides a solid foundation to build on. So Chief Hanous sends her regrets. Before we proceed, we'd like to have an idea of who is joining us today. So if you can use the polling function to indicate whether you represent a local government, a First Nation, a consultant, a community, or other.
Okay, so we've just launched the poll here, so I'm going to give you all a chance to vote, and we will leave it up there for another couple of seconds and shut her down in 3, 2, and 1, and let's see who all we've got here. And so right now, as it looks, since you can't see it there, Justin and Colleen, I'll read it off to you. 52% are private sector practitioners or consultants. That's over half. Over a third are practitioners or consultants with local government, and 14% say they're with federal practitioners or consultants with federal or state and provincial governments. No one on there is a practitioner or consultant with Indigenous government or a multicultural, inclusive, or Indigenous engagement specialist. So 50% private sector, 38% practitioner consultant with local government, and 14% practitioner consultant with federal or state government. Okay, there you are.
All right, thanks, Drew. That's a neat cross-section to be presenting to for this presentation in particular. So now the next question that we have for the group is, how would you rate your own organization's public participation in terms of diversity and inclusion?
Okay, we have opened up that one and getting a lot of people voting right now, so we'll give you another 10 seconds to get your votes in. And we'll shut this one down in 3, 2, 1. And let's have a look at the results. And we have just about half of them say they're about middle of the road. 47% say middle of the road. 33% say it's good, but there's room for improvement. 17% say it's poor, and 3% say really poor. And nobody is going to go out on a limb and say that it's great. So you're talking about half the group that says about middle of the road, and some actually say that their organization is poor. All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Now, as my friend Colleen mentioned, Tides of Change is the first joint economic development strategy in Canada between a municipality and a First Nation. The strategy builds upon the Alert Bay Accord, which is the first agreement in Canada between a municipal and First Nations government to enshrine common goals and pledge mutual support in civic and cultural matters. We are also home to a historic British Columbia Chinatown. So we are a very diverse community packed into a tiny, geographically restricted area. Cormorant Island, as you can see here on the screen, is just 4 square kilometers in size, and we're located off the northern tip of Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of the province of British Columbia, which is the west coast of Canada. Our population of 1,000 people is about evenly split between the two communities, and there's a fine green line on the image there where you can see the boundary between the municipality and the First Nations territory. So we share the island, but we have distinct settler and First Nations histories, cultures, and economies. Now, Cormorant Island is interesting in that it served as the regional economic hub for northern Vancouver Island for decades. Each community had their own economic development plans and actions, which sometimes resulted in duplication. We have 2 marinas, 2 rec centers, 2 elementary schools, and so on. It's an approach that worked for years because there was sufficient economic activity to go around due to the strong commercial fishing industry. A young teenager here could leave school and make hand over fist. They could buy a house, buy vehicles, and feed a family. In the 1980s, that started to change with the demise of the commercial fishery, and by 2013, the local economy was in crisis. Hotels, restaurants, grocers, and banks were closing in conjunction with a massive attrition of the youth. As you can see in the photo on the screen, we used to have seine boats rafting 4 deep in the harbor, and today there might be 15 active commercial fishing vessels operating from Cormorant Island. So in 2013, leadership from both communities realized a critical need for an economic plan and that there'd be substantial benefits to working together in terms of cost savings, avoiding the duplication which had previously occurred, and creating a common voice to advocate for the needs of the island.
So that's when we, myself and my colleague Will, came on board with EcoPlan. And at that point, the leadership of both communities identified, as Justin said, that they needed a joint plan. But the main challenge would be finding objectives and actions that reflected the needs of both of those communities. And so we had a lot of discussions about, best methods to do that and the role of public participation. And what we decided on was to have deep public participation right from the get-go, as diverse and inclusive as possible in order to build that trust, to discover common values that we could build on, and to get buy-in for subsequent implementation. And this would require a new level of inclusive public participation on the island to really embrace that diversity that Justin was talking about. And when we talked about diversity in this project, we meant cultural diversity, socioeconomic diversity, inclusion of other minorities, and just in general, moving beyond those usual suspects that came out to planning events. So that's just a bit of background on kind of the story of the project. But what we're obviously here to talk about is public participation. And so for that, we wanted to start right at the beginning with making that engagement strategy. The first step, as with all engagement strategies, is to learn about the engagement context of the community. But in this case, it's kind of 2 communities, and there's some areas of overlap. So we knew that there would be 2 different contexts in terms of how people like to be engaged, what their past history with engagement was, what their communication channels were that they preferred, and things like that. And we started off to find out this information by just going to the island for 2 days and walking around and meeting people. We called it intercept interviews, which was just basically a nicer way of saying, going up to people on the street, doing door-to-door chats at the grocery store, at the bank, at the community offices, and things like that. So really what we found was there was areas of overlap, and in fact this graph could have the gray area be a lot bigger. There's actually quite a lot of areas of overlap, but there were some areas where there was separate kind of engagement context for the 2 communities. So just a few examples of what those were. specifically in the Namgis First Nation, there was a lot of kind of planning burnout. A lot of plans had taken place. People had felt that their voice maybe hadn't been heard in those plans or that the plans hadn't been implemented. They were, because of that, less likely to attend in-person events or participate in activities. And the community was generally really engaged in social media. On the flip side, the Village of Alert Bay really liked to talk. They liked to come out to events. They liked planning processes. But they were often seeing kind of the usual crowd coming out, so we needed to move beyond that. And also, Village of Alert Bay was an aging population, so kind of more traditional communications methods in person and bulletin boards and things like that would be important. But importantly, there was quite a lot of areas of overlap. Both communities really emphasized that food and prizes would get people out to events. Word of mouth and existing networks of trust were big for sharing information on the island. And just places around town like bulletin boards and the band office and the village office were where people got their information. So we then took that information and we worked with a steering committee that was made up of community staff and council members from both communities to come up with a plan in terms of engagement activities. And what that ended up looking like, this is a bit of an oversimplification, was most of the activities at the beginning were joint activities, but there were some separate activities for Namgis and for Alert Bay, and there were more for Namgis because, as I mentioned, they were less likely to come out to events. But then as the project progressed, those activities were kind of woven together more, so by the end it was mostly joint activities. So I have a poll question here, Drew, if you could help me out. The question is, do you track diversity among your public participation participants? So when people engage with your projects, are you tracking some measure of information about them so that you can track diversity?
All right, and we've got those coming in. While people are voting, I have a question here for you, Colleen. You showed that slide with the activities and how things gradually wove together. Was that a conscious decision you made to start off by engaging Namgis more than Alert Bay and then gradually bringing them all together?
Yeah, that was the plan because we'd heard that it was going to be harder to reach Namgis members, so we put in some extra effort up front to make sure that the word got out to them and to start building trust and interest in the project. I would say it wasn't as smooth, that the lines weren't as smooth as that graph was. Sure. Like it was a bit lumpy over time. As we saw that, you know, one group wasn't being engaged as much, we could do a push to get more engagement from that group.
And you talk about trust or lack of. How would you describe the scene when you first got there between, you know, the level of trust between Namgis and the Village of Alert Bay?
Yeah, actually, when I mentioned trust, is more trust in outsiders like myself and trust in the planning project or the planning process. So Justin can speak to this, but I believe the level of trust is actually really good between the two communities.
Oh, okay. Let's have a look at the poll results.
Extremely high.
Okay. That's good to know. So let's have a look. Do you collect data to track diversity among your P2 participants? 21% say they do, and then we got a split. 39% each say sort of and no. So
okay,
there you are. Kind of the vast majority sort of or don't collect data about diversity.
Okay, yeah, and that's really interesting, and that's something that we don't track in all our projects, and we really did carefully consider if we wanted to do that here, because we didn't want to set it up right from the get-go that there was kind of this us and them division. And in the end, we were really glad that we did track it because, like I said, it enabled us to see that we weren't reaching Namgis members to the degree that we had originally hoped, and to ramp up that one-on-one engagement. So the engagement strategy had lots of methods of public participation, as plans do, which I won't go into all of them. A lot of them were, very traditional open houses and things like that. But there were 4 themes that I want to touch on that we used. Public participation that I think was more kind of inclusive and aiming for that diversity than in typical projects that I'm familiar with. So those 4 areas were on sense of ownership of the plan, the importance of facts and values and differentiating between those two. The third one is meeting people where they were at, and the fourth was on building on existing networks of trust on the island. So the first one, that ownership piece, we really focused up front on getting people to feel that this was their plan. So one of the first engagements, or the first interactions that people had with the plan, once they heard it was happening, was we had a Name That Plan competition. And people submitted names, and then at the first community event, we used audience response unit clickers to get people to vote on the plan, and we awarded, or to vote on the name and awarded a prize. So what was great about that was Tides of Change really quickly became shorthand for the project in the community, and now it's just shorthand for economic development in the community, and it's still very commonly used. Another thing we used is really focusing on mirroring people's own voice and own words back to them through the use of quotes. So at community events, we had quotes up on the big screen. We had quotes on posters. We had quotes on posters around town as well. And the final report uses a lot of quotes throughout it to kind of, I guess, to highlight what areas it's talking about. So I think that was really important for people to hear that their voice was heard. And we didn't attribute the quotes to anyone. It was just a Cormorant Island resident. So there was no distinction between the two communities there. In terms of celebrating past joint successes, we had heard that there was some skepticism about planning and whether or not it ever came to fruition, whether things were implemented. So throughout the project, we really focused on highlighting past successes where something that was in a previous plan is now something that the island enjoys, like the boardwalk and schools and things like that. So we were hoping that that would foster a sense of ownership. And then finally, just making sure that all throughout the process, every time we talked to somebody, every report we created, it was really clear how people's input was being used in the process, in the planning process. So the second theme that I wanted to talk about was facts and values. And obviously having common facts allows, or having facts allows you to give informed feedback. But one reason we really wanted to focus on having facts here was so that people would have a common understanding of the facts, and that we could kind of get disagreements about facts out of the way. You know, what size is the fishing economy now? We can actually, you know, we can settle that with data. And then we can focus on differences of values, whether you like fishing or tourism, and well, you know, where your values are different and where they're in common. So this here on the side is just an example of how we took the information from the research and we really wanted people to interact with it rather than it just sitting in a report. So this poster was put up on poles throughout, like, you know, what are they called? Electricity poles throughout town. And we also had quizzes to do with the data, the economic facts at community events and things like that. So there were just a couple of ways that people could get familiar with that information rather than just having it hiding somewhere. I think I already covered those. The third theme was really around meeting people where they're at, and by that I mean physically where they were at, and also kind of where they were at in terms of their understanding of planning and understanding of the local economy. So because we were collecting data on what community people were from, we could see that we were kind of not engaging as much with Namgis members. So we really stepped up these meeting people where they were at activities, doing door-to-door surveys, intercept interviews on the streets and at the band office and at other community gathering places, stopping by businesses, and doing unstructured interviews. So we could really start off the interview by talking about kind of what people were interested in talking about to do with the economy rather than coming in with an agenda. And the final kind of inclusive public participation theme is that we really built on existing networks of trust. So some of these networks of trust were within a community, for example, Namgis social media channels, and others were cross-community, like there was an arts cooperative that had members from both communities. And we worked with some youth on the island, one youth from each community at the start of the project to kind of tap into youth networks of trust. So these students were hired to go out and talk about the project and meet people and hand out brochures about it and administer door-to-door surveys and things like that. Another way we tapped into networks of trust was we partnered with community organizations. So we worked with a couple of nonprofits to get them to administer surveys, and we tied it to donations. So if they hit certain thresholds for getting surveys out there, they got a certain level of donation. So the ones that we worked with were the library and the arts cooperative. And of course, social media is all about networks of trust, and we had a schedule of bi-weekly social media updates, Facebook quiz questions, and things like that. What came out of this? They did, in the end, develop a joint objectives and joint actions that were approved by the councils of each community and had a really strong public buy-in. This is just the vision and objectives here, just to show you kind of what was going on there. And then there was also a series of about 20 to 25 actions divided into 5 strategies. And that's kind of where the transition point between Justin and myself happened, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Thanks, Colleen. I arrived at the end of year 1 implementation and have been able to watch and take part in some of the incredible projects going on here. One of the action categories that Colleen just had up for us in Tides of Change is business support. Now in 2014, the credit union that had been in the community for decades closed down, which left individuals and businesses without any ability to perform on-island banking. We were fortunate to have Van City, which is Canada's largest community credit union and a corporate leader in access and inclusion, come to the island, and in 2015, the Van City Cormorant Island branch began its first year of operation. Just to give you an idea of community participation, within a year, it met its objective of 500 credit union members by year end. And since then, assets under management continue to grow and operating costs are drastically lower than projected, which is partly due to the community's commitment to spending cash on the island. By spending on the island and not going off island to spend, the requirement for new cash infusions is reduced, which means that we don't need a $8,000 round-trip armored car service several times per year. Van City Cormorant Island may also be the only credit union branch in Canada with staff comprised entirely of First Nations individuals. One of the other action categories under Tides of Change is tourism. And the Tides of Change Implementation Committee recognized last year that the strength of the American dollar and reduction in international travel from the US opened a gap for us, which led to the creation of the Cormorant Island Tourism website. Since then, we've measured increases in tourist visits to the island, and in the case of the municipality, we've watched a 450% revenue increase at our campground. Another objective of Tides of Change is improving quality of life on the island and attracting new people. In 2016, we installed a 75 kilowatt solar photovoltaic system, which created some short-term local jobs and has attracted international attention. The works comprise BC's largest per capita municipally owned solar PV installation, and we're already generating more power than we use on sunny days. So it's our hope that advanced projects like this will attract a younger, skilled and professional labor force to the island.
And Justin, I'm just going to break in just to point out you've got about 5 minutes of your time to go.
Okay, sounds good. We also had some quick start projects underway before I arrived, which included a island-wide community market, which had not existed before, and also interpretive signage installation. The first time I came here, we had no idea what anything we were looking at was. So now when we have visitors come, they've got these branded signs across the island to explain the history of what they're looking at. We also launched an entrepreneurship program which catered to 10 folks in the initial intake, and we've had 3 businesses come out of that. Alert Bay Seafoods, a hair salon, and Alert Bay Pizza. So one of the big things that was lost here was access to food. You couldn't buy seafood from the region on Cormorant Island up until last year. And also pizza delivery was a big one. So all 3 of those businesses are going strong, and we're looking forward to running another intake for the entrepreneurship support program.
Okay, sorry. So this is just the actions from the plan, and just the dark check marks show things that are completed, and the light check marks show things that are in progress. So a lot of work has already been done on this, and part of that is because the engagement during the project was strong, such that people really expected results right away. So actually, I moved to the island for almost 2 months after the project was completed because they wanted someone to just start doing these actions right away while they were hiring a longer-term economic development officer. So I think the tick marks here just show that, you know, things are happening, and that's due to that inclusive public participation that happened during the planning process. Is that a fair thing to say, Justin?
I think that's perfect. The implementation has gone very well. At the end of last year, we were just awarded a roughly $280,000 grant from the provincial government to move forward with some of our larger action plans. So we're looking forward to seeing the implementation continue.
Great. And that leads me into kind of our final thoughts and lessons learned that we thought we would share with you today. So the first one was around deep local knowledge. So I mentioned that at the beginning of the project, my colleague and I went there for a couple days and talked to as many people as we could. But we weren't kidding ourselves that we would know all of the kind of complex engagement histories that we would need to know on the island. So it really was about having trusted partners locally, and our knowledge of what was going to work in terms of inclusive P2 evolved throughout the project. So it wasn't ever static. That engagement plan was a living document. We really felt that the inclusive nature of the public participation was critical for achieving a couple of important things with this project. The first was that relationships and trust were built on the island at all levels. So among community members, staff, across councils, in the process of developing this project, and that trust and relationships can spill over into other aspects of joint community planning as well, and of course for implementation for this project. It really, I think, was important for the island in that it found common values upon which to build for other projects. And then Justin mentioned that the island had just gotten a grant from the government, and that's one thing that's been really interesting to watch with this project is that funders are really, they really appreciate seeing the partnerships. And so this project, more so than others, has been lucky to attract funding and interest from different partners. And then the final point that I wanted to make is about the importance of inclusive public participation to reconciliation. So for those of you that don't live in Canada, reconciliation is a really important nationwide project right now in terms of reconciling relations between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. It's really, you know, it's something we hear about very often here, and oftentimes it takes the form of talking about it. But I think what this project is so important for is it's really an example of how working together on a project can support reconciliation through shared successes, through relationship building, through working through project problems together, and through seeing success together. And I hope that other communities can see this process as a way to move towards reconciliation as well. That's all. Thank you very much. We would love to have a conversation, any questions or comments that you have.
And I'm just checking, and I don't see any questions coming up just yet. But as you think of any, by all means, type them into the question box. Open up, put your hand up. We can open up your microphone, and you can ask that way. But in the absence of the questions, we will say thank you to Colleen and to Justin, and thank you for bringing that insight to us.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Drew. Thank everyone.
All right. So from Cormorant Island and Alert Bay and the Namgis First Nation, we're going to head off to St. Paul, Minnesota. One comment has poured in here, and it is from Linda, who just says, sounds like it was a great process. So there is some endorsement there for you right now from a colleague. St. Paul, Minnesota, where they were faced with a situation, we'll hear more about that coming up shortly, which was basically bringing their schools in a bold leap into the 21st century. And we're going to find out exactly how they did that with the facilities and how they sculpted that process to suit the people who actually have to use it. Anne Carroll, and many of you are familiar with Anne from her work in P2. She is also former schools trustee with St. Paul Public School District, and she was very much a part of this. And Tom Parent, facilities director with St. Paul Public Schools. They are joining us now from St. Paul, Minnesota. Anne and Tom, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Drew.
And
thank you for being part of the webinar today.
And I'm just going to hand you off the screen, and you can take it from here.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate the opportunity to tell about our facilities master planning process and what it's meant to the community of St. Paul Public Schools. And as much as I, as the facilities director, would love to have this be about the facilities, really the real story that we're hoping to share is how St. Paul Public Schools created an organizational culture that believes in and commits to inclusive and thoughtful stakeholder engagement as central to large-scale system planning efforts. So a little bit about St. Paul Public Schools. We're the second largest school district in the state of Minnesota. We're also the capital city here in Minnesota. With approximately 37,000 kids, we've got a really broad base for our students. You know, we are 78% students of color and Indigenous students. 72% of our student body lives in poverty. A huge percentage of students who speak a language other than English at home, and diverse learning needs across the full spectrum. So really a place for us in which you know, we have a broad demand for us to really honor and respect the folks that learn and work here in St. Paul every day. Now, the piece that, you know, is interesting as color context for this is, you know, our demographics are not representative of the city as a whole. And they are even more different than the state of Minnesota as a whole. So we've, as we deal with kids, which are of course the leading edge of demography, this has been a piece for us to have diversity inclusion be central, recognizing that our city is changing and recognizing that we are at a point in which we need to do our processes different. So as we lead into this, Drew, we were hoping we could lead with a couple poll questions now, just to take a quick snapshot of the room.
Okay, and the first one that we're asking here is, have you done inclusive P2 with a school district or college/university? So I'll give you a few seconds to get your votes in. And we will shut this down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Aren't you glad they don't have me counting down at NASA? All right, questions. Have you done inclusive P2 with a school or college, a school district or college, university? 75% say they have not, and the other quarter says yes, they have. So there you are.
Great. Thank you, Drew. All right. So a little bit about us as a school district then. You know, we are one of the largest landowners in the city of St. Paul with 72 different facilities, comprising about 7.3 million square feet, and I did some quick metric conversion here to come up with our square meters calc. You know, totaling about $2.1 billion worth of assets. So this is a huge amount of public investment that we get to be the stewards of, and the impetus for us to have a thoughtful and effective and efficient process to safeguard those assets were central to the mission as we undertook our master planning effort. But everything we do, it has to be predicated on education. You know, as we look at what's changed from when our district was founded in 1865 to today in terms of how we believe students learn. You know, we are built upon this model of industrial, expert-based education. This is students in desks getting adult-centered content, whereas now we believe, as the world understanding of education has changed, we're very much in a personalized, collaborative environment that really has to be focused on this mantra of personalized learning. Now, this is a topic that gets, I think, has different meetings for different school districts across the country, but the way we've defined it here in St. Paul is making sure we have tailored instruction so that we are able to speak specifically to the individual learning needs of a child. We have student voice and choice, which means the student is an active participant in designing their learning process and engaging where they want to go educationally. And finally, making sure we have an engagement in a technology-rich environment. We are a one-to-one iPad environment for all 37,000 of our kids, but really that's just one facet of what it takes to really be immersed in technology in a way that makes education relevant to the students of today.
So starting around 2010 with some major strategic planning efforts that were very inclusive. By about the time Tom was beginning to look at this big facilities master planning effort, the board and the district as a whole made a formal decision to take a break from past planning and engagement methods and strategies that we had done in the past, mostly because they weren't working on any front. The board also promulgated a nation-leading racial equity policy and a gender inclusion policy, and the district formally committed to really deeply engaging students, families, and community partners. We use the term multiple perspectives in hundreds of different conversations and communications because that's central to decision-making in St. Paul Public Schools. And the district also committed to widespread equity training and some new engagement training.
So as we look at how our educational philosophy has changed, it was important for us to look at what this meant in terms of our management of the facilities and infrastructure that we have. So getting away from this notion of experts knowing best and making sure that we were involving our communities in the decisions as they were the ones most greatly impacted by them. So, you know, we wanted to have a process that allowed us to go from education that was sit and get, that was student or teacher at the front of a classroom, to one that created differing opportunities for whole group, small group, individual learning, peer-to-peer learning, have this fluidity and adaptability of our learning spaces that really met the requirements of personalized learning for 21st century.
Just before we go a little bit further, if I can just break in here, we have a question from Tom about that one-to-one policy regarding the iPads, and he wants to know if the school district provides the equipment or are the families expected to provide them?
Of course, if you're committed to equity and inclusion with our poverty rates and all the other issues, of course the district pays for all of this. We set it up on with a lease-based structure with Apple as a partner. And we went down a bunch of different pathways before we ended up with that because we had to get to a point in time where these were truly content creation tools, not just content access tools. So the district pays at a very, very affordable way so that we can also renew them every 3 years. So it was a staged rollout with students serving as our technical experts, helping students and adults do that. And I'm happy to talk to, as is Tom, happy to talk to someone offline about more of those details.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the question.
No problem. We can share horror stories of what it's like to unwrap 40,000 iPads from the board. So as we get into this process, you know, again, we central to this, we're making commitments around what's going to happen when we change. So the ability to understand what it would take for us to have personalized, flexible, collaborative learning environments to really meet the needs of our educators where they are and students. To have this be equity-centered so that it wasn't a cookie-cutter response that was prescriptive in the outcomes, and to have us understand the very unique and different needs of all of our students across the city, which of course leads to the community conversation, which is the ability to have participatory, inclusive, contemporary, responsive engagement to our students, our teachers, our staff, our community, as a way to really help us get to that point where we can support 21st century community and educational demands. We have no shortage of functions that we serve here in the city, and we want to be responsive to those and find a way to balance those needs in a way that really reflected our community input.
So Drew, can you pop up the last poll question, please? And I can't see it on my screen, but
sure.
the one
This is the one about barriers
people...
to P2?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Fire away. Okay, so that is the question. What are your top 2 barriers to inclusive P2? And if you would please tick the top 2 that apply. So you may answer more than once. And so we're going to give you a few more seconds here. Say in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's have a look at the results. What we see is that, well, it's kind of spread out here. 70% say we don't have enough funding, time, or support for this. 43% say we reach these stakeholders, but they rarely take part. 35% say they don't have enough experience for respectful engagement. 26% say they're not sure how to reach the stakeholders, and 22% say it's not a high priority for the agency or client.
Thank you for those. That's food for thought for all of us.
It is.
I think.
Well, and I think it's also a wonderful transition for us to recognize, I think, some of those founding commitments that Anne spoke about from our Board of Education. The ability to have the time and the process to prescribe what was originally meant to be about a 20-month process, which ended up being about a 24-month process, to have inclusive engagement was, we recognize, a true blessing from an organizational standpoint. So for us to lay out a 4-phase process in which, you know, we start with the quantifiable data, the things that we know and can be largely decided or largely understood in technical terms, which we described as our phase 1. You know, this is understanding the age of our building systems. How old's that roof, and when is it gonna need to be replaced? You know, also taking in factors like demography and enrollment projections, have some of those quantifiable pieces, which can then feed into phase 2, which is a district level look. Let's take a holistic view of our organization and understand the consistent parameters we want to have around the outcomes of this process. So use our community to establish a district level lens so that we could take it then into what we called phase 3, which was all of our schools taking that district level guidance and articulating it in their own way in their own schools and communities, so that we could have that as a fodder ultimately for phase 4, in which we tried to weave back together all the different pieces that we had learned throughout the 20 months to that point, to have something that really reflected all of the engagement we've had throughout this process.
So, because, you know, we're all good P2 people, right? We did an intentional, inclusive engagement design process that began by adopting the IAP2 core values. We determined our place on the spectrum, which was involved, even though we fully intended, and you'll see in some later slides, to do an enormous amount of actual collaboration because of the nature of the highly technical nature of this content and extremely formal and legal mandates around funding and capital bonding decisions, as well as just capital expenditure approvals. We put it at involve, even though we used a lot of collaborative approaches. We formally committed to involving stakeholders at every point in the process, and of course, per the core values, to helping decide what that process should be. And as we all know, to focus most heavily on the issues that matter to the stakeholders. Yes, of course, it's within the framework of a facilities master planning process, but we asked them what they cared about most and focused on a lot of those issues.
So as we get out of phase 1, which of course was the data component, and got into phase 2, which is the district level lens, clearly we needed to have a diverse and broad perspective set from our community to help us understand what it would take to come up with the visions, principles, and standards of this process, as well as our guide to how we prioritize and the work that we then extrapolate down to the site level work. So this was a way for us to identify not sort of representational stakeholders, but more process stewards. So we ended up with a group of about 65 people, which I was admittedly worried about the size of corralling that size of group, but ended up working quite well. But it was meant to be an intentional blend of department leaders, principals, staff, students were a huge component in this, as were key partners like the city government, the local planning organization, partners like the YMCA and other out-of-school activity providers, and a way for us to really come together and talk about issues that impact everybody and set a consistent framework for what we do from there on out.
One quick note on this one. Tom came to me on the board and said, we think we should have board members on this. And I said, absolutely under no circumstances should you have board members on this, because we just screw it up, right? It's the wrong type of people for this type of committee. It was like double dipping. And so the board agreed to not be on that committee, which I think turned out to be a really, really good decision.
I of course would not have told her that at the time, but yes, it was. I believe it was, and it also speaks to me about one of the issues we struggled with, and I heard reflected in the polling results, which is getting people to the table, believing in their ability to have meaningful input, believing in the fact that this will actually yield something of value. We asked for some very significant time of these stakeholders, and we really wanted to make sure that they understood how their voice mattered, and came from a belief structure that though you may have been through similar processes with the school district historically, this was different and this was going to yield something different. So from that district level group, again, with the outputs that they gave us with the vision principles and standards, we were able to then transition this to looking at our individual schools. Now, as we do this, it was important again to build on relationships and put the focus on some of our primary relationship holders, which tend to be the principals of individual schools, for them to help us make sure that we are being intentional and diligent in our in the stakeholders we got to the table. So we were fairly prescriptive around limiting this. Again, this was a learning for me in this process. I, of course, wanted to throw the doors open and have anybody who wanted to come be part of these workshops. But Anne and some of our family engagement staff really helped me understand that by doing that, we are unintentionally disincentivizing folks from attending. The folks that don't necessarily know how their voice matters or aren't able to navigate complex systems like a school district, we were going to lose them as part of this process. So we put the onus on our principals to say, we want 4 students, 4 teachers, 4 parents, and 2 to 4 community members that really represent your school, all that you are and all that you want to be, and have us, have that be sort of that core planning team for the school. We also used our parent advisory committees, which are cross-cultural, cross-racial, and really are sort of another avenue for us to have thoughtful feedback from our communities about being representative and being inclusive, so that we could leverage personal relationships. If we weren't getting the right people to the table, or we thought we were missing a critical perspective, we had personal connections into the community that would help us find the right people and help get them to the point of belief where they knew that their time was going to be well spent. Finally, we wanted to make sure that we had the internal capacity to lead this process in a way that honored the commitments the board had made and the district had made around racial equity, around inclusion. So not only all of our internal staff, but all of the partnering architects and consultants and facilitators we used went through 16-hour racial equity training, so that we had a protocol around how we engage on topics that are incredibly difficult to talk about, particularly in settings in which you aren't with people you see outside of those contexts. So it was a way for us to have a grounding in how we as a district operate and what our expectations are when you're out talking about community aspirations for us as an organization. It was also a way for us to start building empathy. When we started doing the school by school design, it really wasn't each school as an island. It was understanding our schools within the system of a K-12 education. We didn't want one elementary school doing something completely different from the elementary school down the street. So we had our connected K-12 pathway. So every elementary school that fed into a middle school, that then fed into a high school, they were all in the same room at the same time, making sure that they were hearing the challenges that each building faced, understanding, you know, some of the ways that they were grappling with those issues, having some cross-pollination around what were some good ideas that were coming out of this so that we could build on good ideas and successes from other schools. And we also break down some of these barriers of, nothing, my school doesn't get any of these things, it's always for the other people that get these things, and have some ability to show where consistency was in that district, and where opportunity really lay, so folks could understand that K-12 journey that a student makes here in St. Paul Public Schools. And we also wanted to understand that there is a very different way we articulate those vision principles and standards at each school because of not just the nuance of the culture of the building, but also the building itself, the community that we serve, the academic programming that's in that building. So a way for us to engage that and build knowledge and depth in understanding in our communities about the issues that impact the physical environment and the way it supports both academics and our sort of community service. So, this is a series of activities, just as some representative sample of what we did in those pathway workshops. So, these were Saturday mornings for 4 hours at a piece. We asked for a fairly significant commitment of time because we believed we needed that amount of inertia and depth in order to really engage in this process meaningfully.
And those dates and times and places were determined by participants. That was their first choice.
Although at a couple of beautiful Saturday mornings, everyone thought better of those choices in hindsight. But it was the way that we found we were going to get the most folks to the table and most able to support it. So, as we got together, there was a lot of grounding activities around aspirationally where we wanted to go, what was unique about your program, what was your highest hope for the building and how it served your needs. What are the ways in which we understand the issues you face today? It was hard. We wanted to break through the issues of, listen, my room is freezing all day, every day. I have to wear my coat all year round. What can we do about that? We needed to get that hierarchy of needs out there so that we could talk beyond just the horizon of today and really look at, how are we addressing the critical short-term issues as well as those long-term aspirations. And with that, we were able to set the context to then dig into more typical planning and architecture processes in which we do design exercises. A school design team with their sleeves rolled up, sketching on top of floor plans, to going through empathy walks throughout a building so that they understand, a student's the path of a student's day and what are the key pieces that they interface with in a school. How do we understand programmatic differences? Be it arts or Montessori education. We wanted to make sure we understood what differences those require in the physical environment, give folks the opportunity to define those for us in a way that is more nuanced and more specific than I think sort of our general planning measures were. So again, being respectful of those programmatic differences, but also understanding that those individual nuances of school, community, culture, and building itself really help set different responses for the vision principles and standards.
So just keeping in mind this is Core Values Awards, right? So just highlighting that inclusion of a wide variety of stakeholders, this notion that we do the grounding work with a group of people, a group of volunteers, so that they are prepared to contribute in a meaningful way versus people randomly showing up and not having any idea what's going on. So this allowed incredibly in-depth work by normal human beings, which was incredibly empowering for them, and it allowed them to contribute so much more in-depth, sophisticated, and substantial perspectives.
And we were tremendously humbled by the amount of time that folks gave to this process. So in phase 3 alone, we had 818 people participate in our workshops. Again, Saturday mornings for 8 hours at a time, 2 4-hour workshops in that process. And again, as we're doing this and developing sort of the outputs of that, which are building by building, pathway by pathway designs, we're going back in and doing the checkbacks with our district level committee, doing our checkbacks with the school board. We are out in the community, doing some information sharing. We wanted to make sure that folks who might not have been at the table were at least aware of what the work was going on, and we were doing a roadshow to pretty much anyone who would invite us, church groups, district councils, which are the local planning councils and neighborhoods here in the city of St. Paul, making sure that we were out, making sure people were aware of this efforts, making sure they had some engagement with it, a really robust online presence, as well as some online polling, being very specific around, understanding that the real heavy lifting happened at those workshops. We in order to leverage the input and data we were getting from our participants, it was really important for us that everyone be at the same table as they have those conversations and synthesize them together so that folks understood the balance of issues that were going on here in the district.
Just going to break in for a moment here, Ann and Tom, and just to say you've got about 5 minutes left if you can, please.
Perfect. Thank you. We've got just a few more slides. So as we look at this, coming out of this process, it was critical for us that this not be a plan that sits on a shelf. There is no end to this planning process. And in fact, we started the work with our group in phase 2 by really reinforcing this notion that through a process like this, through engagement of folks and the amount of time that we were asking them to do, this was a plan that was going to A, be implementable, and B, be long-term viable. This was something that was going to outlast school boards, superintendents, facilities directors, everybody involved. And we wanted that. We needed that engagement to inoculate us against that, to loss of credibility, loss of belief that this was something that was truly representative to our community. So, long-term, we had to make that commitment to ensuring that we had the same engagement and process so that we could evolve our master planning effort to reflect just changes, conditions on the ground. As we look at this, we're now almost 2 years past when the wrap-up of the work, and we need a system and a structure in place to make those changes, to make sure that it stays relevant. So we used our 65-person committee from phase 2 to actually design what that governance and engagement structure really looked like, so that we could say, we've all gone on this journey together and have built this incredible amount of knowledge and understanding of the district as a whole. How do we keep leveraging that? How do we have this be a conduit, or have to be a conduit for us to have sustained engagement for our district's long-term needs and assessing the equity and efficiency of the work that we're doing. So those really...
I have another question that's come in. This is from Lisa, and she wants to know what online tools you used for this process.
Sure. Lisa, we are not exactly the most technologically sophisticated organization. So, a lot of it was pretty straightforward. A lot of content management systems like Constant Contact, just for emailing and tracking media output. A lot of online survey and polls. There's an online platform called School Wires that we use for all of our content management or our website, and then a fair number of traditional means like a Pinterest board and some of those other pieces for us to just have some online forum for folks participating in the workshops to have some means to flag other ideas. We did also use, in a lot of our workshops, we used Socrative, which is an online polling tool, as well as, I'm going to forget the name of it, but it was essentially a mini Twitter. It was a Twitter feed essentially to the room itself, so it was just for the participants there. You sign up as part of the process, but it was a way for us to have multiple conversations happening at once so that we could park good ideas and come back to them, get questions that otherwise weren't being represented, respond to folks who didn't feel comfortable necessarily standing up in front of a room and sharing their thoughts. So we tried to give multiple means even for people in the room for workshops to share their feedback.
So moving to non-digital, but you also may have seen a photo a couple slides ago where there was a lot of, during workshops and in related activities, a lot of opportunities, obviously you saw, for people to work together, but then a great deal of presenting out, where students were really at the center of this. So we had a lot of kids and their boards or their drawings or their descriptions of what was important to them, presenting out to full groups of other students and adults with their microphones, explaining what was important to them. So we just use a lot of support systems and support structures in the process design implementation to make sure that we walked our talk around what we meant by inclusion.
So ultimately what this has meant for us as we transition out of sort of that initial planning phase is, adoption by the school board of sort of the vision of the work in totality, some governance structures designed by our community, ability for us to provide some touchback measures for that FMP committee so that we have those ongoing planning methods. They did also make commitments. We've got in the next 5 years approximately $500 million worth of construction that's coming out of this planning efforts, which keeps us on pace to do slightly less than half of the work that our community identified through this process, but is something that we believe really demonstrates the meaning and value of their input and the work that we get to do.
This is job security for Tom.
That's right. So, and again, we're about 2 weeks away from actually reconvening the 65-person district-wide committee again for the first time since initial plan adoption, to then evolve and have the next 5-year, rolling 5-year plan figured out and prioritized so that we understand that we're still responsive to our community needs. So what this really allows us to do is to share out in ways that we haven't before. The image on the right is actually from our website. It's an interactive map in which anybody can go and zoom around the city of St. Paul, know exactly what kind of work we're proposing to do. It also links to the content generated by the workshops and the committees and teams so that folks can see sort of conceptually where this work is generated from and how it's informed the work that's actually been funded and committed to. It allows us to target partnerships between us, other programming partners, again, like the YMCA or, again, after-school program supports, as well as, the local Parks and Rec division, and have that be something where we're able to leverage what other folks can offer so that we don't have to be all things to all people. And it's allowed us to by the first time ever, having us have a long-range committed to project structure, the ability to continue the engagement that we set up during the FMP to the next level of granularity, which starts to get us into building by building. We've used the same structures, a lot of the same techniques, and a lot of the explicit commitments that were generated by the original master planning effort now into individual building design towards construction. We've got 3 images here of just 3 of the, we've got approximately 10 buildings on our drawing boards right now that are this level of intervention, that have this level of community engagement, and we're building that, again, that knowledge base and that agency among our community to really provide some guiding input to how we undertake building design processes.
So Tom, we are going to have to wrap this up very shortly. Yeah, and you are done.
We're done.
See how it,
so
I can anticipate like that?
Good job, Drew.
I thought so. Got a quick question here from Dorley Duffy, wanting to know if you were able to support the planning and implementation of this comprehensive planning and engagement process internally with just school district knowledge, or did you use external process support such as consultants?
So Dorley, it helps when you have a school board member who is a P2 guru and has taken it upon herself to train most district administration in public participation. So that's been ace up our sleeve throughout this process. We ended up hiring 6 different architecture firms to help us facilitate the process because we are such a large organization, and in order to do this in any reasonably timely fashion, we really needed to staff up and have these conversations ongoing all at the same time. So external supports were critical, but at the same time, I think one of the key components of success in this process has been that it has been staff-led and district-led, so that the credibility and blood, sweat, and tears are there from all of us, so that it makes it that much harder to dismiss the effort as something that some consultant was using to drum up business or otherwise impose their own vision of what a school district should be onto us, which is, again.
Yeah, this is deeply owned by this school district, and since this plan was completed, there's been 5 out of 7 new school board members. There's been a new superintendent. There's been mostly new cabinet members. Enormous changes, not all planned, let's put it that way. And yet still this has prevailed. And it's because that commitment was so deep and so widespread, and it was from kids up to the superintendent and board.
All right. Anne and Tom, thank you very much for sharing about your project with St. Paul Public Schools. Before we go, we have one question that relates back to Tides of Change on Cormorant Island. So Colleen is standing by to answer it. Question is from Tom, and he wants to know if you compared your project with the community economic development initiatives that were facilitated by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Tom points out that step 1 of establishing the Friendship Accord. So what are your thoughts on that approach? So Colleen, I'm going to hand things back to you.
Great, thanks Drew. I just thought it was worth mentioning this one to everyone because the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a great set of tools and initiatives for First Nations and municipalities working together on economic development. And the SETI tools, Community Economic Development Initiative, came out after we were done Tides of Change, but we were in communications with them while they were developing it, and Tides of Change is featured in there. But if you are working on a project that might involve a First Nations and a municipality, it has a lot of engagement ideas and case studies and tools, and I think they even do kind of one-on-one counseling and support and things like that if you're in Canada. So it's a good resource to be aware of.
All right. Thank you very much, Colleen and Justin Beadle, of course, from Tides of Change, Tom Parent, and Carol, and all of you for taking part in this. Coming up next month, April 11th, second Tuesday in April, we're going to be featuring 2 more Core Values Awards winners, and these are the winners from IAP2 USA, the winner for creativity in putting together a project with San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, and they won their Core Values Award for the way they handled the pre-construction phase of a major transportation corridor improvement project. So Lulu Feliciano will be joining us for that, and we are also scheduled to have on board Vancouver's Community Engagement Advisory Network. They won the award for P2 for the Greater Good for their project called the Advanced Care Planning Initiative. We're going to hear more about that coming up. We'll get more details coming up on your websites, both at IAP2Canada.ca and IAP2USA.org. Once again, thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to you taking part in our next webinar. Thank you again to our guests, and from all of us at IAP2, I'm Drew Snyder, bidding you a very fond good day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.